The feds are literally paying Los Angeles millions for water it'll never even get. Not for fancy pipelines or some new desalination plant. Nope. They're paying them to just leave it in a lake. Seriously, as of right now, July 16th, 2026, the United States Bureau of Reclamation has agreed to fork over up to $65 million to the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. The deal works out to $325 for every acre-foot of water the city promises not to touch. That's a total of 200,000 acre-feet. That water was supposed to go to 19 million people in Southern California, but instead, it's staying behind Hoover Dam. It's like a ghost transaction, just trying to keep Lake Mead's surface from completely crashing. You know those two bone-white rings scaring up the canyon walls in the American West? Well, billions in federal cash from the Inflation Reduction Act are now being used not to build anything new, but to hit pause, to basically buy time. This $65 million deal isn't some grand solution. It's more like a shot of morphine for a patient who's in really bad shape. And that's just the water situation. The electricity, that's a whole other mess. Even as they were signing that deal, federal engineers were in a frantic race against the clock deep inside Hoover Dam. There's a $52 million emergency upgrade happening right now. They're trying to quickly replace 3 of the dam's oldest turbines. Why? Because of a number. 1,035. That's 1,035 feet above sea level. If Lake Mead's surface drops below that, the existing turbines will start chewing themselves up. Bubbles form in the low-pressure water and then pop with the force of tiny explosions. It's called cavitation, and it just eats away at solid steel. The dam's power output would absolutely tank. From over 1,300 megawatts down to just 382. To try and stop this, they're putting in these new wide-head turbines. It's like a last-ditch effort for hydroengineering, designed to keep generating power even if the lake gets down to a level that used to be totally unthinkable, like 950 feet. They're basically retrofitting a marvel from the 20th century to handle a 21st century disaster. If you zoom out a bit, the reason for all this panic becomes super clear. 470 miles upstream, the other big reservoir is doing even worse. Lake Powell, which is actually the second largest reservoir in the United States, is just drying up right before our eyes. As of this week in mid-July 2026, after a terrible winter snowpack that only brought in 36% of the usual spring water, the lake's surface is sitting at roughly 3,524 feet. Full capacity is 3,700 feet. So, today, it's only at about 23.5% capacity. But the really scary number? That's 3,490. 3,490. That's the absolute minimum level for generating power. If it drops below that line, the turbines at Glen Canyon Dam, all 1,320 megawatts of them, just go silent. That means the power for 5.8 million people across the West just vanishes. Right now, the lake is hovering only 34 feet above that line. Just a few bad months. A stretch of hot, dry weeks. That's all the room for error we've got. Here's the kicker, though. The detail that really tells the story. None of this is a surprise. It's an inevitability, written down in a document over 100 years old. To actually understand what's happening in 2026, you gotta get this fundamental math mistake that was made on November 24th, 1922, on that day, in a hotel in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Representatives from 7 states signed the Colorado River Compact. It was a big deal, but it was also a fantasy. The guys who wrote it believed the river carried almost 18 million acre-feet of water every year. They were basically looking at data from one of the wettest periods in the last 1,200 years. Tree rings, though, they show the river's real. Long-term average flow is closer to 13 million acre-feet. So, they'd allocated 5 million acre-feet of water that just didn't exist every single year for 100 years. The whole system was built on a lie. The compact basically split the basin in two at this really random spot in the Arizona desert called Lee's Ferry. The upper basin states, that's Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, New Mexico, had to send 7.5 million acre-feet of water downstream past that point to the lower basin California, Arizona, and Nevada. Another 1.5 million was promised to Mexico. The upper basin also got 7.5 million acre-feet for themselves. Add it all up. 7.5 plus 7.5 plus 1.5 equals 16.5 million acre-feet. That's 3. 5 million more than the river actually carries in an average year. So, it had a deficit built in from day one. For decades, this mathematical error was kinda hidden because there was just so much water stored in the system's two huge banks. Lake Powell, which was created in 1966, and Lake Mead from 1936. When they were full, they held a combined 50 million acre-feet. That's enough to cover all of Pennsylvania in a foot of water. Those reservoirs worked like a buffer, covering up the problem, making good on promises with water that was borrowed from the future. Well, the future is here. That buffer is gone. And the bill? It's due. Hoover Dam, which Franklin D. Roosevelt dedicated back on September 30th, 1935, was supposed to be this huge symbol of America taking control of nature. It was like a monument to engineering and progress, promising to make the desert actually bloom. And it did. The river, which used to be this wild, muddy torrent, got tamed into something predictable, something you could measure. It became the base for tons of cities and farms: Phoenix, Las Vegas, Denver, Los Angeles, San Diego. 40 million people get their drinking water from this one system, which is totally overused. An economy that's worth $1.4 trillion annually, that's 1/12 of the entire U.S. GDP, depends on its water. 16 million jobs rely on it. This is the stuff the headlines about drought just don't tell you. This isn't just about not enough rain. It's about a huge problem with demand. The river waters 5.5 million acres of farmland. Those farms, especially in places like California's Imperial Valley and Yuma, Arizona, produce 90% of the United States' winter vegetables. So, the lettuce in your salad in January, the broccoli, the carrots, they really are made of Colorado River water. That whole agricultural system was built on this legal idea of first in time, first in right. And nobody was earlier or claimed more than the farmers in the Imperial Irrigation District in Southern California. They have the biggest, oldest water right on the entire river, legally, under this 100-year-old law of the river. Their water can't be cut until pretty much every city and farm in Arizona and Nevada goes dry first. This legal reality has created an impossible political mess. The states are now totally fighting each other. Here in mid-2026, with that December 31st deadline looming for new operating rules, the entire basin is fractured. The lower basin states, California, Arizona, and Nevada, did manage to send a joint proposal to the federal government back in May. It said cuts should be based on Lake Mead's actual water level, which was a dose of reality for the system. But the upper basin states, with Colorado leading the way, rejected it. Becky Mitchell, who's Colorado's main water negotiator, pretty much sums up how they see it upstream. It's not their fault. The upper basin doesn't even use all of its 7.5 million acre-foot allocation. They see this crisis as a problem caused by the lower basin just using way too much water. So why should their states, which actually have the legal right to develop more water, be forced to give it up to feed the endless thirst of cities and farms hundreds of miles downstream? They just won't agree to any binding cuts. The whole thing is completely stuck. Representing the other side of that argument is J.B. Hamby. He's California's Colorado River Commissioner, and he's the youngest major water negotiator in the basin's history. But he speaks for the oldest and most powerful water rights. He said, "This is a historic time of reckoning, where growing demand over the decades exceeds a shrinking supply." Hamby's job is to protect California's massive, legally binding water, while also trying to work out a deal that keeps the whole system from completely falling apart. A collapse that would ironically hit his own people the hardest. California might have the older legal rights, but you can't drink a court order. If Lake Mead drops to 895 feet, which is its dead pool level, the water just stops flowing. For everyone. And this is where the simple physics of the crisis gets really scary. Water in a reservoir isn't just some volume. It's a source of pressure. Hydraulic head. That huge weight from trillions of gallons of water is what spins the turbines at Hoover and Glen Canyon. As the lakes get smaller, the pressure drops. To make the same amount of electricity, you need more and more water. When it's full, making 1 megawatt hour of electricity at Glen Canyon Dam used to take about 1.9 acre-feet of water. Today, with the lake almost at its power pool cliff, it now takes almost 2.9 acre-feet to make that same megawatt hour. The whole system has become unbelievably inefficient. We're pouring more and more of a dwindling resource and to get less and less back. It's a death spiral, written in the laws of physics. Now, here's the part that nobody's really talking about on the news. For 100 years, this whole conversation has been dominated by 7 states and the federal government. But they're not the only sovereign powers in the basin. 30 federally recognized tribal nations live within this watershed. And for 100 years, their rights were just ignored. They weren't invited to the talks for the 1922 Compact. Their water was given to other people without them even agreeing to it. Today, those 30 tribes actually have legally recognized rights to about 3.2 million acre-feet of water every year. That's almost 25% of the river's average flow. That's actually more water than the entire state of Arizona is entitled to. And for the first time ever, they're pushing for those rights at the highest levels, not just as interested parties, but as sovereign governments with rights that existed long before the states themselves. Amelia Flores is the chairwoman of the Colorado River Indian Tribes, or CRIT. She's the first woman elected to lead her tribal nation, and she's right in the middle of this big shift. Her people, a group made up of the Mojave, Chemehuevi, Hopi, and Navajo, live along the river in Arizona and California. Their water rights are among the oldest in the whole basin. In a move that really shook up the legal world, the CRIT Tribal Council recently passed a resolution saying the Colorado River is a living being with the legal right to exist, thrive, and be protected. The personhood of our river, Flores explained, is as important to our existence as the air we breathe. This isn't just flowery language, it's a legal strategy. By declaring the river a legal person, the tribe is fundamentally changing how these negotiations work. They're not just arguing about acre-feet and how much water gets delivered anymore. They're arguing for the actual life of the river itself and positioning themselves as its main protectors. In July of 2026, while state negotiators were still completely deadlocked, Amelia Flores and other tribal leaders were actually hosting international meetings about protecting indigenous water rights. They're building a coalition, sharing ideas, and getting ready to force a reckoning that's been put off for a century. The states and the federal government are used to fighting each other over smaller and smaller pieces of the pie. But the tribes are walking into the room and questioning the whole recipe for the pie itself. Their 2 million acre-feet of mostly undeveloped water rights is the single biggest chunk of unallocated potential in the whole system. Any deal for the world after 2026 that doesn't include them as equal partners is just not going to work out. A future where the tribes lease their water to desperate cities like Phoenix or Los Angeles, or where they force the system to leave more water in the river for its own health, isn't just a what-if anymore. It's the new reality. And with the systemic breakdown happening, the federal government is basically just doing emergency triage. It's eating its own system. To stop Lake Powell from crashing below its power level this year, the Bureau of Reclamation, directed by Commissioner Camille Calamlam-Touton, put an emergency plan in place back in April 2026. First, they dramatically cut the water flowing from Glen Canyon Dam downstream to Lake Mead, holding back almost 1.5 million acre-feet. This propped up Powell, but totally screwed Mead. But that wasn't enough. So the Bureau looked upstream. It gave the okay to release up to 1 million acre-feet of water from reservoirs much farther north, especially Flaming Gorge Reservoir on the Wyoming and Utah border. Water that actually belongs to the upper basin states is being sent downriver on a rescue mission. It's like a transfer of wealth, of security, from one part of the basin to another. All just to keep those turbines spinning at Glen Canyon for a few more months. The people and businesses around Flaming Gorge, which is a popular recreation spot itself, are watching their lake get drained to save another one hundreds of miles away. It's an act that really shows you what this crisis is all about. The system isn't running on any kind of sustainable plan anymore. It's just lurching from one emergency to the next, sacrificing its own parts just to keep its main heart beating. The water being released from Flaming Gorge today will take weeks to snake its way through the canyons of the Green River to finally reach Lake Powell. It's a slow, barely enough transfusion for a system that's bleeding out. And it sets a really dangerous precedent. If Flaming Gorge can be sacrificed today, what about Blue Mesa tomorrow? Or Navajo Reservoir? The whole upper basin is now aware that their savings accounts can be raided to pay off the lower basin's debts. The anger and mistrust between these states is reaching a boiling point, exactly when they need to cooperate more than ever before. Camille Kalimlum-Touton, the commissioner of the Bureau of Reclamation, now holds one of the most powerful and honestly most miserable positions in the country. She was appointed in 2021, and she basically inherited a crisis that had been building for generations. In the summer of 2022, she was the one who gave the ultimatum to the 7 basin states. Figure out a plan to cut 2 to 4 million acre-feet of water usage, or the federal government would do it for them. The states couldn't do it. They've continued to fail. And now, the absolute final deadline is coming up. December 31st, 2026. On that day, the 2007 interim guidelines. The rulebook that's been governing how Lake Powell and Lake Mead work together for 2 decades just disappears. It's gone. Without a new agreement to replace it, there are no rules. Shanti Rossett, a policy manager at the Metropolitan Water District, just laid it out. Replacing them isn't just a routine policy update. It's a fundamental reset of how the system may be run going forward. If the states can't agree on a new framework, the power to decide who gets water and who doesn't will land with the Secretary of the Interior, and by extension, with Commissioner Touton. The federal government would basically have to take authoritarian control over the water supply for 40 million Americans. It's a scenario absolutely no one wants. A political and legal nightmare of epic proportions. But with every day that passes without a deal, it looks more and more likely. The doomsday clock is definitely ticking. The effects of this century-long deficit aren't just theoretical anymore. They're being felt right now, in real time. At Lake Mead, the dropping water levels have revealed things that have been submerged for ages. A World War II-era Higgins boat. The intake valve for Las Vegas, now just sucking air. Even human remains, stuffed in barrels, tossed out by mobsters decades ago. The lake is literally giving up its secrets. For boaters and marina owners, it's an economic disaster. Ramps that used to lead to water now just end at 100 feet of cracked mud. Houseboats are stranded in dry canyons. At Lake Powell, it's the exact same situation. The stunning views are still there, but they're framed by that harsh white bathtub ring, a constant visible reminder of what's been lost. Tourism economies that depended on these reservoirs are just collapsing. And what about the river itself? Below Glen Canyon Dam, the Colorado flows through a stretch of the Grand Canyon. For years, they've carefully managed water releases to try and rebuild beaches and protect delicate ecosystems. But those releases are now a luxury the system just can't afford. Below Hoover Dam, the river that used to run all the way to the Sea of Cortez in Mexico now just trickles out into the desert sand, miles from where its delta used to be. A whole ecosystem, one of the world's great desert river deltas, was sacrificed to water cities and farms upstream. The river is just a utility now, a plumbing system. Its wildness has been engineered out of existence. But the engineers who built this whole thing never imagined it running on empty. The $52 million turbine replacement at Hoover really speaks to this new reality. They're not just swapping out old parts. They're making the dam tougher against a future that was once just unimaginable. The original designers never even thought Lake Mead could get so low. These new wide-head turbines are basically an admission that they messed up, a quiet acknowledgement that the old assumptions are dead. We can't count on these reservoirs refilling anymore. This megadrought that's been hitting the Southwest for over 20 years isn't just a temporary thing. Scientists are calling it aridification. It's a permanent shift to a hotter, drier climate, totally intensified by global warming. That 13 million acre feet the river provides now, that might even be an optimistic guess for the future. The supply is shrinking, even as the demands are locked in by laws and economic stubbornness. This is the math trap we're in. Even if every single state, city, and farm agreed to these huge, painful cuts, the climate itself is making its own relentless cuts. Evaporation from the two giant reservoirs alone takes more than 1.5 million acre-feet every year. And as temperatures go up, that number climbs even higher. The soil in the basin is drier, so when snow does fall and melt, more of it just soaks into the parched earth before it ever even gets to the river. Less runoff, even with the same amount of snow. The system is just bleeding water from 1,000 new places. And then there's this really fundamental question hidden in the Bureau of Reclamation's own data. The whole law of the river is this really fragile framework of agreements, court decisions, and guidelines that was built for a stable, predictable world. That world just doesn't exist anymore. The system was designed to manage scarcity, but it was never designed to manage total absence. The legal battles happening right now aren't just about tweaking who gets what. They're about facing a raw truth. There isn't enough water to keep all the promises that were made. Someone has to lose out. That dream of the American West, all those lush golf courses, sparkling swimming pools, and endless bountiful farms, all carved out of the desert, it was built on one single, finite river. We've hit the end of that river. While the lawyers and politicians argue, the river just keeps shrinking. That July 16th deal to pay Southern California to leave 200,000 acre-feet in Lake Mead, that's just a Band-Aid, a finger in a dike that's crumbling everywhere. That 200,000 acre-feet is less than a 2-foot rise in Lake Mead's water level. It's a temporary break, bought with taxpayer money, that will just disappear after a few hot months of evaporation. It solves nothing. It just pushes off the inevitable moment of truth. So, 3 questions hang over the 7 states, 30 tribes, and 40 million people who rely on this dying river. What does the law even become when it's based on water that doesn't exist anymore? Who will actually get to decide who receives the last drops from a failing system? And what does it say about a civilization that built an empire in the desert, only to watch the very river that kept it alive dry up right before their eyes? The water released from Flaming Gorge this spring is now somewhere in the Green River, slowly winding its way south towards Lake Powell. It's a tiny pulse of life, a measured sacrifice, moving sluggishly through this huge, thirsty landscape. At Hoover Dam, engineers are working non-stop to put in turbines designed for a low-water world that's already here. And in meeting rooms from Denver to Sacramento, the arguments just keep going. This frantic search for a solution that doesn't demand the one thing no one seems willing to give up: their water. The deadline is December 31st. The river isn't waiting.